Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and in today's video we are going to look through the abilities in the Dungeon Journal for each of the 9 bosses in Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. So these are actually pretty complete looking, what's happening in here, so yeah, we'll go through them and read them. This might not be the kind of video for everybody, but sort of thing that seems cool, and I'll try and call back mechanics where there is something similar from a recent expansion that jumps out at me. Of course, I'm going to read some of these things and misunderstand exactly how they work. We'll have to see how it comes out in PTR testing, but for those of you like me that just love diving into the new stuff as soon as you possibly can and seeing what it all does, I figured this could be an interesting video. And I think the takeaway from it as well is this is more advanced than most PTRs, most first builds of a patch on PTR are, which to me suggests, in terms of patch release timing, that they're probably trying to beat the D4 season rather than come out after D4 is my guess on this. So honestly, the PT or the Dungeon Journal looking like this is my biggest clue towards thinking this is like a early May patch rather than a, late June patch, because like early June is kind of not possible without causing a lot of pain to crossover Diablo/WoW players. So, all right. Kazara here, the first boss. Before Deathwing, there were many attempts to infuse a subject with Shadow Flame. The only one that survived was Kazara. Driven mad by the excruciating pain inflicted by her Elementium plates, she now serves as the ferocious guardian of the Shadowed Crucible. Powerful Elementium plates maintain the integrity of Kazara's volatile core. At 80, 60, and 40, sections of armor are shattered off into Hellseal fragments. The blast inflicts damage to all players, and the numbers are different on the different difficulties. We're going to read the Dungeon Journal on Mythic, but I'll change it between things a little bit to see if there's big stuff like that happening. Okay, so there is this Infernal Heart ability, which has the Healer Alert tag on it. This one says, the exposed core pulses, inflicting damage and hastens as she loses more armor. So this is just a dot tick. On Mythic, it's 33k every 4 seconds, and that tick goes up as the fight goes longer and she's lost more armor. The Hellseal fragments are blazing metal scraps that I guess you want to dodge because they do damage if you don't. Then there's Revenant's Blood. Kazara's gruesome wounds spew out masses of her menacing lifeblood, each inflicting some damage within yards of impact. So potentially this is going to be like stuff right outside of the side of the boss that puts little swirlies on the ground, maybe, just next to the boss. So all in all, some pretty manageable mechanics, sort of reminiscent of the last boss of Azure Vault as well, where you reach breakpoints and shatter off parts of the boss. It'll be interesting to see if there is anything push related whether this interacts with the rest of her spell queuing and whether this interrupts cast that she's in the middle of or something like that. I would guess it probably doesn't really do much on that axis because this is a first boss and they usually try and stay away from that kind of complexity there, but we'll see. Dread Rifts. Kazara releases a furious roar that afflicts several players with a sinister mark. After 4 seconds, unworldly rifts tear open beneath these players, doing damage to anyone within 5 yards. Kazara's exposed core causes Dread Rifts to target an additional player for each piece of armor that's been shattered. So this is just targets you, you spread, you make sure you're not super low, and easy. Now, the Searing Heat of the Dread Rift is a void zone that gets left behind as well. So you get targeted, you have 4 seconds, and I guess you probably want to go and take this as far away to the edge of the room as you can within those 4 seconds to avoid gumming up the ground with, a bunch of Dread Rifts in bad places. All right, up next is Rays of Anguish. This is a mythic mechanic. Well, it's a mechanic with some mythic stuff going on to it, at least. So let's read the mythic version first. So Rays of Anguish is fragments that blast out from the Dread Rifts, so from the Void Zones. Each fragment ignites a blistering beam and hunts a nearby player, leaving a molten scar in its wake. The beam inflicts damage every 0.3 seconds to players caught within. So this is a get out of here quickly thing. It's not quite Razageth breath levels of you're dead if you stay in here for a couple of ticks, but you want to get out of there very, very rapidly. And On Mythic difficulty, these rays will continue to hunt players until they are consumed by a Dread Rift. So it looks like the fragments are going to blast out of a Dread Rift, and then you're going to want to kite them into a Dread Rift, at least on Mythic. Whereas on the lower difficulties, perhaps you just kite them for a little while and then they expire. And so if a Ray of Anguish crosses onto an existing Molten Scar, which is the beam left, like the ground left behind, then that does damage and damage over time to all players. So it's sort of, you're going to want to play this sort of like Tron, where you don't cross over the existing lines, right? You want to just draw a nice straight line to a new Dread Rift. You don't want to go over the Molten Scars that you left behind, and you want to minimize the size of the Molten Scars because they are going to be void zones as well for the rest of the fight, it sounds like. So, pretty cool. Oh my god, this guy's about to do a reading of his latest masterpiece, just like me reading the Dungeon Journal. Okay. Hellbeam. Upon reaching 100 energy, Kazara unleashes an annihilating beam of horrific power, doing damage, a lot of damage. This one is Razageth breath levels of damage to anybody caught inside. During this time as well, she disgorges increasing amounts of Revenant's blood as her armor is shattered off. So maybe the blood comes out of her, especially during the Hellbeam, or maybe only during the Hellbeam. Okay, I'll move away from the author here. I just don't want it to distract everybody who wants to read the Dungeon Journal. I don't want them to get distracted and also read what the author was reading there. Okay. Wings of Extinction. This is another healer mechanic here. This one is a damage to all players and a knockback to all players that also puts a dot on all players. So potentially somewhat reminiscent of Razageth here with the breath and the knockback thing. I doubt that this will have anywhere near the intensity of Hurricane Wing from Razageth, because again, this is the first boss. But this is going to be the kind of thing where you're going to want to position so that you're not directly in front of a Molten Scar or a Dread Rift, right? And then finally, we have Terror Claws. This is the tank mechanic. It is physical damage and Shadow Flame damage. And it leaves behind a dot that increases your physical damage taken by 200% for 20 seconds, and also does Shadow Flame damage over time. So very similar to the Razageth tank swap mechanic, although 200% increased physical damage taken is a big increase. I think the Razageth ones, even on Mythic, are only 100%, so this one is going to be very much taunt when the other tank gets affected by Terror Claws, and then you will be fine, I'm sure. It looks like an intimidating amount of physical damage, but to tanks, that is not very much at all. Okay. Molgoth is up next. The creation of Shadow Flame destroyed countless elementals, now only the strongest remain. Krosgoth and Moltania. One of shadow, the other fire. These powerful elementals combine their powers to create a force of ultimate destruction. Is there a model here? There is, okay. So, yeah. There's 3, I guess, Molgoth. Maybe they combine or something. Yeah, we'll see. Or, okay, maybe that's the Living Shadow Flame or something. All right, so, Krosgix. All right, so it's called Molgoth, Krosgoth, Moltania, Krosgix. I'm seeing a lot of different names here. I assume that Krosgix and Krosgoth are just... Maybe one of them is the plural. I don't know. Maybe there's multiple of these things. Okay, so, Krosgoth, now again, has a ability called Coalescing Void, condenses a point around them with intense void energy, inflicting damage to all players within 40 yards and applying Corrupting Shadow. Players farther from the center take less damage, so fall-off damage. Not inherently lethal, even if you're close to it, but presumably quite a lot of damage. Umbral Detonation. Krosgoth forms Shadow into multiple players and detonates them after 6 seconds, which is 8-yard fall-off damage. Or 8-yard, not even fall-off damage, 8-yard AoEs around those players, which also applies Corrupting Shadow. Corrupting Shadow is a dot and also a health reduction. Not sure if there will be a duration on this. And also, when the Umbral Detonation expires, you'll leave behind Lingering Umbra, which is a void zone that will also give you a stack of Corrupting Shadow if you walk into it. So, again, you're going to want to take these to the edge of the room, spread with them, and not stand in the void zones they leave behind. Shadow Spike is the tank mechanic from Krosgix, which puts damage on and applies Corrupting Shadow, which we don't have the effect on, but presumably this is some kind of shadow vulnerability that you'll get when you're tanking Krosgix, and you're going to want to swap based on that probably. And then Shadow's Convergence. Shadows appear Shadow appear into the mortal plane and converge on Krosgoth, inflicting damage to players in their path, applying corrupting shadow. So Krosgoth is gonna pull in shadows maybe from the edges of the room towards itself, and you're gonna want to, maybe it'll be like dodge them. Maybe just everybody will get a stack or something at some point during it. Not 100% sure how that would work. My guess is it would be you could dodge it if you kind of play Super Hexagon against it if you ever played that game. Okay, Moltania is up next. This is another of the two bosses, presumably. This one has a Fire Meteor, which is split damage that also applies Blazing Heat to all the enemies hit. Blazing Heat and Corrupting Shadow are the dots that will be applied to players. The Corrupting Shadow dot is a little bit less intense in terms of damage per second than the Blazing Heat dot, but the Blazing Heat dot doesn't come with the health reduction that the Shadow one does. So Fiery Meteor does a bunch of damage to all, but it's split between all targets hit, and it does give them all a stack. So you're going to want to soak this. In theory, you want to soak these mechanics with as few people as possible so that you get as few of the dot stacks as possible, but you also want to be safe about it. Again, this is a second boss, so you probably don't have to super min-max it, but if this was a super hard boss, it would also be something you'd be considering immuning probably as well. Molten Eruption is Moltania erupts with fiery strength, launches missiles. After 5.2 seconds, players can intercept the missiles, taking damage. If no players are struck, she instead does a bunch of damage to all players. So this is just like kill Jaden, bunch of swirlies on the ground. Everybody needs to go, well, you need to get them all soaked. And if any of them go unsoaked, she's going to nuke the whole raid. Unlike Kill Jaden, you're not going to just die if you fail to soak one or two, but you're going to take a lot more damage if you do that. You're going to take probably, missing one is fine if you're not taking any other damage. Missing two is fine if you're taking no other damage and you're all topped. And missing three is going to be a wipe under almost any circumstances, would be my guess. And even missing one is bad if everybody's not topped and other mechanics are happening. Okay, Swirling Flame. Moltania swipes at a player, causing swirling fire to move at their direction, which does damage to everybody in his path and applies Blazing Heat. So this is them. Moltania just lobs a fire wave at somebody that you will want to not stand in that fire, is going to be my guess. And then finally, the tank mechanic here does damage and applies Blazing Heat to the current target. So this puts a stack of the dot. Notably, the other tank mechanic here... Oh, okay, it's the same debuff name. Corrupting Shadow, it is the same debuff name. I misread this earlier. So yeah, both of the tank mechanics apply their respective debuff, which means there's not necessarily actually going to be a huge need to tank swap here. The Corrupting Shadow one does come with a health reduction, though, so maybe you'll tank swap to just avoid getting too much of that on the same person. But you might not even really need to worry about that too much. And then finally, we have Living Shadow Flame. So yeah, there's no mechanic written here about like the two converging into Living Shadow Flame. My guess, though, is that that's what happens, is that Molgoth is the Shadow Flame elemental, and at some point in the fight, you've done enough damage to Krosgix and Moltania, and they merge into Molgoth, aka Living Shadow Flame. That's my read of this right now, but we'll see. So Living Shadow Flame creates a large meteor in front of them, doing an absolute boatload of damage, but it's split between all targets within 8 yards and applying Shadow Flame to all enemies. This impact creates a ball of energy that deals damage to all players within 40 yards and applies Shadow Flame. Players farther from the center take less damage. So this is a really interesting mechanic because it's a combination of the two mechanics, which again makes me think that this is the two bosses combined. It's a soaked that you want to split the damage between everybody, between a lot of people so that it's not lethal, right? But then it's also fall off damage. So people that aren't in that 8-yard soak want to get way away. And if they can get farther than 40 yards away, they're going to avoid taking a stack of the dot as well, which is this Shadow Flame dot. Now let's see if we can find Shadow Flame in here. There's not necessarily something where... Yeah, okay, so Shadow Flame, my guess is that Shadow Flame is like a dot it's probably just like a combination of Blazing Heat and Corrupting Shadow. Just a really nasty dot that you want to minimize the stacks of as much as possible, but we'll see. Probably reduces your health as well. Blistering Twilight is 4 players get affected. After 5.2 seconds, they explode. The explosions create swirling Shadow Flame at their location, which knocks back the target and does damage. And then Shadow Flame melts the ground as well. So I assume you'll have time to get out of this between the Blistering Twilight hit and then the Swirly and get out of it. It kind of would make me think that you'd want somebody to like soak this to avoid the... Like it maybe is something where it's got that same missile thing from the Molten Eruption, but they don't have that written in here, so maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just, oh, you take the damage and then you move out of the Swirly and it leaves behind a Void Zone. Not sure. Okay, here's several missiles, so I guess probably not. So Molgoth spews out several missiles of destruction into the air after 5.2 seconds. A lot of things happening at 5.2 seconds in here. Players can intercept the missiles, doing more damage than just the Moltania ones. Orbs of Shadow Flame converge on the spot of the detonation, inflicting damage to any player struck. If no players intercept each location, they instead do a boatload of fire damage to all players. So this, again, is a combined mechanic here where you want to soak, and then each soak spot is going to have orbs approaching it that maybe there will be a gap that you can get through, or maybe you're just supposed to run out and hit and take only one of them. But they do a lot of damage, so my guess is you're probably supposed to dodge the Orbs of Shadow Flame that are coming in. We'll see how easy that is to do. All right, Crushing Vulnerability is the tank mechanic here, and this one is a physical damage hit that also causes the tank to take increased damage from Shadow Flame for 20 seconds. Now, both of your tanks are going to have Shadow and Fire dots if I'm correct that Corrupting Shadow and Blazing Heat are permanent debuffs. So Crushing Vulnerability actually creates a little bit of an interesting thing where maybe you want one tank to tank both Krozgix and Moltania, because there's no mechanic that says you can't have them stacked on top of each other. So one tank could tank both of these bosses for all of P1 or whatever. And then when they combine into Molgoth, the other tank starts taking this hit, and it's a big physical hit, but it only increases your damage taken from Shadow Flame, and you don't have any stacks of the Shadow Flame dot. Maybe that's a way of abusing this. We'll see. Maybe this also is something where if you 3-tank it, it gets really easy, because you can just have a tank that's not got any dots on them taking these Crushing Vulnerabilities or something. I don't know. And then there's also this Shadow Flame Burst mechanic that says Living Shadow Flame, which again is Molgoth's name. Releases a burst of flames at their current target, doing damage to all players in front of the casters. So just a frontal to get out of. Okay. Up next, we have Experimentation of Drakthir. This is the failures of developing Drakthir, aka Devastation Evokers, before they got it right and made Preservation Evokers. Some of these early versions were too volatile to destroy and instead kept dormant to protect the world from their brutality. Now they awaken to test their prowess against the champions of Azeroth. So these are all different failed Drakthir, taken directly out of my Guild's Raid roster. First one is Neldris here, which has Mutilate. Neldris marks a random target, charges to and mutilates them a few seconds later. This does a bunch of damage to all players in their path and gives them a bleed. The effect stacks, so presumably this is just whoever gets targeted probably runs to the boss if you can, and everybody else gets out of those paths because it doesn't look like it splits the damage or anything. Or maybe this is something where it hits... No, yeah, it looks like it hits everybody in the path, not just first person. So yeah, that's probably how you play this, is the Mutilates run behind the boss maybe and get close to it to avoid anybody else getting hit. Or maybe just the Mutilates stay where they are and everybody moves out of the lines if there are lines. Deep Slam. Neldris slams the ground with her fists, sending out a shockwave, doing physical damage to all players in a 55-yard cone in front of her. Okay? You're going to want to not stand in front of that one when that's happening. The slam sends reverberations through the ground, causing a pillar to erupt, inflicting a bunch of nature damage and knocking back all players 4 yards from the impact location. Each pillar inflicts nature damage to all players every 4 seconds. This damage is reduced the farther away players are from the pillar. So presumably right in front of the boss, there's going to be one of these things after every slam, or maybe farther away, and then you'll just move the boss and stuff away from it and take less damage from this pillar. The pillar probably does quite a bit of damage. Maybe your tank brings this boss back over and keeps stacking the pillars on top of each other to deny less space in the room. Not sure. Forceful Roar here. This is a AoE and knockback on all players. And then Infused Strikes is auto attacks cause the target to suffer 41,630% arcane damage. This effect stacks. My guess here is that it's 41,630 arcane damage over time or something like that. Because otherwise it will be very hard to survive 187k if it's being increased by a factor of many hundreds. So we'll see. When two players with infused strikes touch, their energies react, clearing their stacks and causing an infused explosion, which does AoE. So this is the tank mechanic. And if it is just a dot, maybe you're going to do something where it's like, okay, one tank takes 3 stacks, the other tank takes up to 3 stacks, and then you touch, clear stacks, explode, hit the raid for a bunch, and then the tank continues tanking until they get to 3 stacks, and then the other tank taunts. And that would be pretty low intensity on the number of taunts that you'd have to do, which, depending on how many times you have to taunt the other bosses, could be valuable. It does mean you'd be taking 3 stacks this dot, though, so maybe you'd have to do this on as few as 1 stacks, and then you would do, like, tank A takes 1 stack, tank B takes 1 stack, and you clear, and then tank B takes another stack, and then tank A taunts and takes 1 stack, and then you clear, and then tank A takes another stack. Even still, you wouldn't be taunting all that much with that strategy, but because this triggers off auto attacks, I suspect you're going to be doing this at fairly high amounts of stacks, and defensiving the end of your dot. We'll see, though. Okay, up next is Thadrian, which, let's take a look at the models here. So this is Neldris, there's Thadrian. Oh, wow. Thadrian's had some better days here. Here's Ryanthus, almost a regular evoker, and then there's an erratic remnant that we can't see yet. Okay, so Thadrian, this is the really cursed-looking one. This one has a dispellable magic debuff that is important, that says, players take arcane damage every 3 seconds, presumably. This damage increases over time. Upon removal, the player suffers arcane damage and leaves behind a substance that erupts, which deals damage to all players within 16 yards and creates an erratic remnant at the location. The energy then disperses to a nearby player. The erratic remnant is, I guess, only on heroic and higher, and it periodically does damage to, or it makes swirlies at players' locations that are 4-yard swirlies that you have to dodge out of. Maybe you can kill these erratic remnants as well to avoid that from happening. So this is an interesting mechanic because it's dispellable. It's a ramping dot. But when you dispel it, the person takes damage, unknown how lethal it is, and then also leaves behind that void zone that they need to get away from, potentially, depending on how long you have to get 16 yards away from it. And then each time you're dispelling it, not only are you going to have to make sure that you have somebody who's in a safe spot 16 yards away from everybody, but also you're going to have an extra ad to deal with. So the best way to deal with these mechanics generally is to let them stack up as much as possible and use defensives and externals as you get to high stack counts to avoid spawning extra ads and doing the mechanic as much as possible. Deep Spew is a barrage of missiles that do damage. It's a 10-yard swirly. Uncontrollable Frenzy is a targeting a player, or players, perhaps. Assaults players, inflicting damage every 1 second for 8 seconds. So, yeah, I'm not sure if this is going to be one person that's getting focused attacked here, or if this is raid-wide damage. While channeling, existing erratic remnants react to the energy and do damage to all players. So this is something that means you really have to kill the erratic remnants before you get to the uncontrollable frenzies. Maybe you time your dispels such that you don't have to deal with them. You dispel right after an uncontrollable frenzy, kill the remnant before the next one. And then this boss also has infused strikes. Okay, so looks like that's going to be an interesting tank mechanic where you don't actually have to taunt swap to clear it. You just have the tanks touch whenever they need to clear their stacks, and it does do a bunch of raid damage when you do. And all the bosses are applying them as well. Ryanthus is the one that is almost a regular looking Dracthyr. Has Deep Breath that you're going to want to not stand in. Has Emerald Blossom, which is it's not like the Evoker Emerald Blossom. It makes a blossom that attempts to reach him. If the blossom makes contact, it heals Ryanthus for 20% of his health. Presumably raid wiping levels of bad in low gear, and something that you can maybe survive at high gear. It doesn't say how you're supposed to kill this blossom. Are you supposed to soak it? Are you supposed to kill it? Don't know. Either way, do that. Or maybe you kite it even, and you're just kiting Emerald Blossoms the whole fight. That seems the least likely, though. Disintegrate is like the Evoker Disintegrate thing. It does damage, and then upon finishing, the magic persists, which slows the player, and also makes them pulse damage to all players within 5 yards every 1 second for 16 seconds, which presumably very similar to regular seconds. And so, yeah, that person's just going to, not stand on top of people for a little while. And then again, this has the same infused strikes mechanic. So a pretty simple council boss in terms of total number of mechanics. Not too much going on with this one. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how this Deep Slam Ruptured Earth thing plays out. My guess is that it's going to involve just tank management, turning the boss, dropping all the pillars kind of in the same-ish place. But depending on how big the room is, that may be more or less feasible. Okay, up next we have the Zakali Invasion. This one has got Zakali wall climbers. Throughout the fight, wall climbers ascend the rampart walls and attempt to breach the sealed door. All right, cool. They slam the door in an attempt to destroy it, which causes damage to all players, I guess, when they reach the door. So maybe you need to stop these because otherwise they'll start blasting your raid for small but ramping, especially as there are more of them, amounts of AoE. So, yeah, okay. Kill some wall climbers, or maybe don't. Warlord Cagney is one of the... So what are the Zakali? The Zakali, is that like a faction of Kalashi? Probably, huh? Yeah, it looks like that. That's what they are, so... Okay. Maybe I'm already supposed to know that. So Warlord Cagney here is one of the enemies. Has Devastating Sunder, slams the ground in front of him 3 times, shattering lines of molten earth. Enemies hit take 124,889 volcanic damage and have their defenses sundered, receiving extra damage from all sources for 15 seconds. The power of the quake causes cave rubble to fall. So this looks like a, it kind of looks like one of those things where it's probably going to be aimed such that it always hits your tank, and then nobody else is supposed to get hit, but we'll see. Has Heavy Cudgel as well, which does physical damage to the main target and all players within 8 yards as well, not split as well. So this is going to be something where your tank is going to tank this, and probably need to make sure that you don't have a tank with too many stacks of the old Devastating Sunder take these Heavy Cudgels. Molten Swing melts a player, not necessarily current target's defenses, doing volcanic damage. Again, volcanic is fire plus nature, and increases physical damage taken over time as well. So maybe this does affect the tank, but yeah, mostly it's volcanic damage that increases physical damage taken. So interesting. Presumably there will be some other raid-wide physical damage. It also increases nearby units' damage done by 10%. So not a generally scary number. That's usually not the kind of aura that would prevent you from tanking mobs on top of bosses, generally. Okay, Ignara is the bird. This one provides aerial support, because it's a bird, by hovering near him. Casts Flaring Firestorm, which is a fire swirly. And Vigorous Gale, which is a wind gust at the bird's location, doing damage to all players and pushing the players back away from her, and doing nature damage during that as well. So, like a mini Razageth Hurricane Wing thing. Okay. Zakali Aid here is... Warlord Cagney calls upon 2 of his commanders to climb the wall and assist him in battle. So maybe it's going to be a mix of 2 of these different types at different times during this fight. There's Obsidian Guard, which charges their shield with lava, blocking all incoming damage for 6 seconds. The shield then erupts towards a random player, doing volcanic damage split between all enemies in a line. So presumably what's going to happen is, yeah, the guard's going to like charge the shield, start charging the shield, point at a player, and then you're going to want to get people into that line to avoid that player getting one-shot. Flamebound Huntsmans have Phoenix Rush, which, oopsie, okay, marks several players with a Phoenix Plume. After 5 seconds, a Phoenix swoops in and knocks nearby players up into the air, so presumably these players are just going to want to spread 5 yards away. Blazing Spear is a physical damage within 10 yards of a location. Players hit take an additional fire damage over time effect as well. Magma Mystics are mystics that maintain a blazing internal heat, causing a trail of volcanic ground to follow them. That volcanic ground does damage every second and reduces movement speed by 30% as well. So presumably you're going to want to kill this thing nice and quick and maybe kite it or not kite it such that you don't get too much volcanic ground. It also has lava flow. So, okay, this is how you can't kite it. It moves on its own. It sinks into molten earth below, moving to a new location and leaving behind volcanic ground. Upon reaching their destination, it does damage to all nearby players as well. And then it also has Lava Bolt, which doesn't have the interruptible tag, which just does damage to an enemy. So maybe you just ignore these later in the fight, but early in the fight, you probably want to kill these things off to avoid getting too much volcanic ground all over the place. All right, so that's the Zakali Invasion. Again, seems like a very simple boss. In terms of difficulty, this one kind of reads like potentially the second easiest in here. Notably as well, this boss does not have tier on it, whereas Experimentation of Drakthir does. So I kind of suspect that this is sort of like Taros and Primal Council, where like Molgoth and Zakali Invasion can be done second. And then Experimentation of Drakthir is maybe something you usually would do fourth after doing Molgoth and Zakali Invasion, but we'll see. Anyways, we will get to the remaining actually, we'll do Rashok now as well. Looking at the time of this video, I'm going to split this thing up into 2 videos. So we'll do Rashok now, and then we'll do the last 4 in a video that maybe will come out tomorrow or something, because this is turning into quite a long video here. Okay, so we have Rashok. Upon reaching 100 energy, Rashok unleashes his full fury at his enemies, doing Shadow Flame damage to all players every 3 seconds. Rashok, let's just read the lore real quick of this Rashok. What is this? Kalashi feller. Rashok, once a great leader of the Zakali, was imprisoned within these halls for millennia, his molten blood constantly siphoned to power the Crucible. The Elder was kept on the brink of death, driving him mad. Due to the recent chaos, he's broken his restraints and seeks revenge on any that cross his path. Very cool. So yeah, full energy, he does an absolute boatload of damage to all players every 3 seconds. So presumably this is going to be something that you're going to want to manage his energy to prevent him from reaching that point. Or potentially this is an enrage on the fight. Or maybe there's some way of reducing Shadow Flame damage taken. I don't know. Let's keep reading. Molten Wrath. This is 3 random lava reservoirs explode with living lava every 15 seconds. Okay? Don't know what that means. I'm kind of getting Lady Minerva Darkvein vibes, maybe. Maybe there's some lava reservoirs around the room, and he targets 3 of them, and then they start exploding with living lava. Wonder what that means, though. Searing Slam. Rashok leaps towards target player, slams the ground at their location, doing fire damage and physical damage to all players within 10 yards, leaving behind a pool of lava reservoir, okay, and also causes all other lava reservoirs to explode with living lava. Oh, cool. We get to see what these lava mechanics are. If it hits an existing lava reservoir, an additional one is created at a nearby location. Okay, so this slam maybe targets the tank, or maybe it targets random players. I'm not sure when it says toward target player which those situations we're in. Lava reservoirs are void zones that do moderate fire damage, but not lethal. They pulse lava during Blazing Inferno, which is not one of the mechanics we know about yet. And then also cause an eruption when they're hit by a Searing Slam. Living lava is the thing that... okay, it does damage to all players within 5 yards. So you don't want to be within 5 yards of a lava reservoir when Searing Slam comes out, because it causes all other lava reservoirs to explode. And also the boss randomly will cause 3 of them to do this as well. So presumably you're going to want to keep these nice and tightly stacked on one side of the room and just stay nice and far away from them. But we'll see. We'll see exactly how... Oh, I guess the problem with that is if it's targeting random players, not tanks, they can't drop them too close to the old ones, because if they do that, they'll be within range to be taking the living lava damage from the old ones when the new one is created. So maybe you do that with a defensive, or maybe you don't if you don't have a defensive, and you just put it, 5 yards away, more than 5 yards away from an old one. That's kind of cool. All right. Raging Stomp is up next. This is damage to all players that also makes Shadow Flame energy erupt from the ground towards nearby locations. So damage to all players, and then Swirlies, I guess. Remnant Lava damage does damage to all players within 5 yards of the impact. Ah, but if it doesn't hit a player, it does damage to all players in the raid. Okay. And players that are hit take a dot. So the boss does a stomp. There are a bunch of soaks on the ground. You need to soak all of them. People that soak get a dot. It's not split damage, so you only want one person doing each soak, but you want to make sure that everything does get soaked, or else you will take a lot of raid damage and probably wipe. Shadow Lava Blast. Cool names in this raid. Rashok slams the ground with his weapon, crushing all enemies within 75 yards in front of him with Shadow Lava, inflicting 1 million Shadow Flame damage to all players hit. I think you're going to want to not get hit by that one. And that doesn't have the tank thing on it either, so that one's probably just going to be you move so that doesn't hit you, would be my guess. Charge Smash. This deals 2.4 million damage to all players within 10 yards of impact. Okay. It's Shadow Flame as well, so it's not even something a tank could live. And it does damage. And on top of that, if you live the 2.4 million damage, it also gives you a nice dot of 33 damage, 33k DPS for 20 seconds. All players outside of the initial impact area instead take 333k damage. That's still a very big raid-wide hit. But yeah, you're really not going to want to stand in the middle of that hit. Volcanic Combo. Ooh, a combo. I love tank combos. So this casts Earthen Crush and Flaming Upsurge in a random order. Flaming Upsurge is fire damage and increases damage taken from Flaming Upsurge by 500% for 40 seconds. Earthen Crush, on the other hand, is physical damage and increases damage taken from Earthen Crush by 500% for 40 seconds. So presumably it will cast either 3 or 4 total of these, and it will either cast 2 and then 1 or 2 and then 2 in some mix. And you're going to want, this is probably going to be one like Shadhar, where you can taunt it mid-cast and it will change its target. And notably here, the fire damage one is going to be way more lethal because that one is not physical. It's not reduced by armor. So 1.2 million fire damage is going to be quite a neat trick for specs like Protection Warrior to survive easily. That one's going to be big defensives. Whereas the Earthen Crush here, 1.2 million physical damage. If you have Shield Block active, you will you'll survive that without using any defensives. Is my suspicion on that one. So interesting combo. Definitely going to be one where it'll matter if it does end up casting 2 each of these. Like if both tanks have to take both of these mechanics. Usually they would do 3 abilities there because otherwise you run into taunt cooldown problems unless it's a really long cast time. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. Kind of reminiscent though of Shadhar and I guess Skolex type tank mechanics, which can be kind of fun. After being drained of his energy, okay, so he can have his energy drained, Rashok lets out a terrifying roar, doing damage to all players and knocking them back. Being back in the conduit when this effect is active increases the damage of radiating heat by 100%. He gains an additional stack of this effect every 10 seconds while he's inside the conduit with 0 energy. Okay, so what's the conduit? The conduit siphons energy here. Rashok's energy is being drained by the conduit, causing a series of violent reactions in the room. So you drag the boss to the conduit to drain his energy and stop him from killing your raid. And yeah, what is radiating heat? Okay, radiating heat, it doesn't say anything about what radiating heat is, but that damage goes up as you have the boss in the conduit during the Unyielding Rage effect. And then, yeah, so there's probably some raid damage on that, would be my guess. Oh no, radiating heat is here. Okay. Energy being drained from Rashok causes his body to do damage probably to the whole raid every 1.5 seconds. I see. So you're going to want to bring him into the conduit, trigger the Unyielding Rage, drain him of his energy, and then take him out of the conduit again so that you don't take too much damage from radiating heat. Volatile explosions are also swirlies that you need to dodge when you do that also. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty simple, drag boss into conduit, drag boss out of conduit, make sure he doesn't get 100 energy. If he gets 100 energy, you will die. You maybe can live a tick of this or something, then bring him back into the conduit. I don't know. Maybe you run out. Maybe it's like a Sludge Fist where there's only a limited number of conduits. Once you run into all of them, you are in trouble there. But I doubt that because then they wouldn't need to have these mechanics preventing you from just keeping him in the conduits. So I don't know. Cool boss though. Does seem like it's probably maybe like the closest to a Sludge Fisty style encounter of the tier as well. Gonna be a lot of just probably blasting the boss, so that seems pretty cool. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this little look at the first 5 bosses of Avarice, the Shadowed Crucible. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.